Hi, welcome back to the Healing Through Art Summit. I'm your host, Dr. Arlene Bianco, and I'm here today with the amazing Sara Fenske Bahat. So Sara, thank you so much for being here. I'm going to let you introduce yourself to everyone.
Sure, thank you for having me. So I'm based in San Francisco, California. You're joining me at home. You have my daughter's pictures behind me. I chair something called the Design MBA program at California College of the Arts, which we'll get into in a bit. And I am the board chair of an organization called Yerba Buena Center for the Arts. I came to the arts later in life after a career in government and finance. And Arlene and I know one another, fun fact, because my husband went to college with her. And so we've known each other for a really long time, and I'm just delighted to be here joining her in a conversation that means a lot to both of us. So thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for being here. We're going to have a great discussion. One of the first things I asked you was, what's the difference between art and design? Because I saw you're chair of Design MBA, and then I'm thinking, I have this art summit. I'm like, do I say art? Do I say design? What is that?
I think those of us in the creative fields can cross-identify those terms a little bit, but the way that I think about it, I tend to take a pretty expansive view of what is art and what is design. And because I'm in an educational context with most of my time, I think about both and culture more broadly as the reflective work on the walls. And so at your kid's school, you might see this as the actual work that they do in the classroom. There's tons of evidence suggesting that when kids see themselves reflected, it is identity affirming. And so I've extrapolated that to the culture context. And lots of people, when I started saying this in the culture context, didn't know about reflective work on the wall as a term. But to me, the culture through design, through art, is really that which reflects who we are as a people in our daily lives, in our communities. And I guess I would differentiate as art I view as not having such an explicit purpose as design, and design sometimes having maybe a more intentional purpose and set of goals. And so there can be something beautiful, a mural painted on a wall, and I would call that art. But if someone was hired to paint a mural for a store, I would probably call that design. I think it's important to say that the same thing could be either, depending on how it originated and how much freedom the creator of that thing had to do it the way that they wanted.
I love that phrase, reflective work on the walls. And it's something that I feel like in elementary school, preschool, they're just more aware of. The teachers do that automatically. And then through middle and high school, it starts to shift. So then it's keeping that awareness of how to reflect back on ourselves and how to do that for the students, how to keep that even through adulthood. From your perspective, why do we need both art and STEM, or science, technology, engineering, math, in education?
It's such a fascinating question. I guess, we all start from our own perspective and experience. And for me, I grew up in the 80s. And so I grew up really good at art and really good at math. And in my mind, they were not separate practices that I had to choose from, right? They were just part of what I did every day and the things that I knew I was good at that I loved to do. But I also had a father who was an accountant and a CFO type person. I have a mother who's a costume designer and much more of a creative type person. And I don't come from a particularly well-off family, right? I was the first person in my mom's side of the family to go to college, first person on both sides to go to graduate school. And I grew up in the Midwest. And so the message that I received as a young person was to focus on math, because that would be the thing that would make my career easier. And that art was something I could do on the side. And I think that that's an important thing to consider, in that it was perpetuated in educational contexts for a really long time. When I look at my own kids, I have a sixth grader going into seventh grade and a third grader going into fourth grade. I see a similar thing, right? They both like to have the practice of certainty with math and technology, especially technology now. They're on Zoom all day. Especially my third grader this year, I think, advanced her technological skills more than I've ever witnessed anyone do in such a short period of time. But I also see them as people who need to balance that with a creative practice. And I see that creative practice really bringing out of them what feels to me like a way of expressing themselves that no one gets to judge or sort of say if it's correct or not. And so I think for me, if you want, the design discipline is a little different than the art discipline in that, like with technology, and often with technology, it's more of a defined process. But to me, I like the balance of the STEM disciplines with the creative disciplines, in that I think it's good for us as humans to balance knowing how to do some things with certainty, but then also having the freedom to express ourselves using a variety of medium. And so I think some people might use music. I find music, I played piano for many, many years. I was a dancer. I find music to be extremely mathematical, right? Like I put those two things in the same place in my brain. But music allows me to express myself in a way that math doesn't always. And, for me to feel like a whole person, and as I see it in my kids and as I see it in my students, I love that STEAM embraces both sides of this. And I have a biased perspective, obviously, but to me, it makes for a much healthier perspective on the work that you do. And so why wouldn't we encourage schools to do that and to give our children that gift so that they don't have to rework it as adults like some of us have?
I feel like it gives them this opportunity, and we were talking about this, where it kind of encourages you to come up with your own answers. And I was talking to my brother who works in Silicon Valley, and there, you would think it's like all engineering, but what they're finding is that the innovators, the ones that are kind of coming up as leaders, able to like think of things outside the box, they had experiences not just in like science, technology, math. It was a broader, so perhaps like gave them that opportunity to explore in a way. And another aspect we had talked about too was this idea that, like you said, to have their own voice and to encourage that in a way where you're not seeking an idea of perfection. There's not necessarily a right answer.
100%. I think there are things where it is healthy to have certainty that 2 + 2 = 4, right? We live in a society where we have a common understanding of, what a dollar means. And those types of things feel so important. But I also think it's important that we each have our way of expressing, but also understanding one another's individuality. And so, sure, like I would even say that creativity can be the way we decide to dress ourselves, right? The way we decide to present to others. When we were talking about reflective work on the walls, kind of trailing off in middle and high school, I thought to myself, gosh, I wonder if that translates to self-expression. And is that sufficient? I'm not sure. Mm-hmm. But it's a really, really interesting question. And yeah, I find it kind of gets to this conversation that we've been having on what is your daily practice? And do you have a little space in every day where you get to do something that makes you feel alive and creative? And that could be cooking, that could be scrapbooking, that could be a really cool Pinterest board. I don't know that it matters so much what it is, but I wonder if any kind of practice like that supports us just being healthier humans who are able to interact with others and appreciate others in deeper ways.
Well, it's stepping into your own authenticity, whatever you do, it's just consistently acknowledging that. And in that way, it's like bringing that reflective work on the walls into your life.
We get a lot of students actually who, come from, so at this MBA program, our typical student is, I think, 29 years old. And we get people who have either come through the business side, who want to become more creative, or through the creative side who want to learn business, right? We have a couple different profiles of students. We also have older students who come to learn the tools of design as executives, which is pretty interesting too. But I would put that off to the side. It's a different conversation. often when students come to us, they feel a little bit like they're weirdos, kind of how I did actually when I came to design. Like they knew they were really good at doing math type stuff, and technical skills is what I would really call it. And they had always had this other pull that they couldn't quite define. And what they come to find is that they've been designers all along. They just didn't know that they were designers. And I really think that's instructive for all of us, right? Like I look back at all the little things that I did that I was really particular about, right? Like I made great mixtapes, excellent mixtapes. And that's a creative act, right? Just having a commitment to making a playlist is a creative act and a creative practice. And so, you know, I know that just in my own life, I came to this work about 6 years ago, really an integrated practice where I combined kind of both sides of my mind. And I feel like a healthier, better person because I did it. And I guess it's a pretty big joy to get to develop that practice for others and with others.
What sorts of things are the students in your program learning that's kind of unique to the Design MBA program?
Sure. So there's a couple of things that are pretty different compared to other MBA programs. Our students learn the practice of critique in a pretty specific way. So for those of you who didn't go to art school, in the normal world, critique might be called feedback. But critique implies a specific set of steps that put the creator of something in the driver's seat of how to get that feedback. And so you could think of it as an elaborate way of offering and requesting consent around the type of feedback that you might get about a creative piece of work. And so, I mean, I tend to be a mega fan of this woman, Liz Lerman, who wrote one of the Bibles on critique called Critical Response. This is up your alley. You should definitely check her and it out. She gives this example of how to critique a baker for making a cupcake. And Liz is a choreographer, so she comes from dance. And to the point of children in the creative arts, I mean, she talks about her experiences as a young child, receiving critique in a ballet class, informing wanting to create something that worked better when she became an adult choreographer dancer. So that's the origination story, and to hear her tell it is pretty incredible. But she gives this example of a cupcake, right? So I'm the baker of a cupcake, and in her model, there is the maker of something, the facilitator, and then the stakeholders, meaning the people that you are asking for critique from. And ideally, those are people who you make things with, right? They're just offering their expertise to help you make your thing better. And in this exercise, there are a set of pretty specific but flexible steps. And first, everyone tries the cupcake and says one thing like, this cupcake makes me think of something, or I'm reminded of whatever. It's not, I really like it, but an observation or a connection to the cupcake. Which sounds silly, but the goal is to affirm the maker that someone had an emotional reaction to the work that they produced, which is what every maker wants. And then the second step, the maker of the thing gets to ask questions of the stakeholders, such as, did you like the amount of frosting I put on the cupcake? Putting the maker in the role of driving the feedback in the first phase. And then in the third phase, the stakeholders get to ask neutral questions, right? What were you thinking when you decided to make that cupcake pink? And so if you translate that to any of your workplaces, right, what you see, and I've used it in board meetings now, which is really interesting. And so at the college I teach on, we're all required to have an outside practice. And so chairing a board and of a changing organization is my outside practice at the moment, with most of my time. And so using this in a board context with people that work at Wells Fargo, McKinsey, all of the places that typical board members or historical board members have sat at, they're just blown away because they've never seen a way of engaging with the work that is created that requires them to be disciplined about withholding their judgment and respecting the person who did the work. And so for me, that's like a huge differentiator for what we're training these MBA students. And, MBA students typically want to be CEOs. I think about if every CEO had in their practice to respect the work of the cupcake maker and to ask those restrained, controlled, respectful questions, how different the world of business might look today. And that's That's my favorite one.
Oh my gosh, that is in itself is transformative. I'm like in the art of what is called like the critique. I mean, this facilitates conversation in a mutually respectful way. Like so, coming from the soul, because you're honoring that I'm speaking to another human being, and I'm also welcoming feedback. I'm welcoming opinions and thoughts and feelings from another human being. So. Wow.
And so what might happen is somebody might say, a stakeholder might say, Arlene, would you be comfortable with me offering you my feedback about the plant that's behind you? And you might say, no, I don't want to hear that right now. And that's okay. Right? And so when we translate these skills from the creative world to the business world, something really interesting happens. And, that's the world in which the Design MBA resides. I would say that connected to that are certainly empathy, storytelling, and many other things that kind of relate to that. But the core thing you can get at a College of Art and Design that you cannot get anywhere else is critique. And to me, I say to the president of my college, this is the most radical thing you could do, is to have an MBA program here. Like, it is crazy that you are willing to do that, and I'm glad. And I would say that, in the context of other MBA programs, we are certainly one of the more radical things that could happen with an MBA program. We also do all the other things that all the other programs do, like teach finance and accounting and everything else. But we do it in a way that is a little bit different and a little bit more encompassing of the acts of creation, not just the act of management.
You're putting together these two sides where, like, there's certain things that come so easily to, like, engineering, math, science, finance, and there's certain things that come so easily to the artist and that creative thought process, and then really merging them.
But what if we're all both? What if we don't have to choose?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. This is it. This is like feeling whole. And we're talking about this all the way from just the little child all the way up to the professional in the world of business.
So I will say, I hope it's okay to say this, but I'll say it anyway. One of my colleagues on that board in particular, who went through this exercise with Liz a couple months ago, he said, I think my executive team at Wells Fargo needs this. Like, I think I'm going to bring it to them. Yeah. He's on the exec team. He's not saying it like in a negative way. Like, he wants to do it with his colleagues. And to me, that little spark could radically change the way that a huge organization, a huge employer in this country, a huge service provider to the families in this country could operate. And that to me is really inspiring.
Absolutely. For you, like, just running the being chair of the Design MBA program, what kind of successes have you seen with combining that? Like, what have you seen your students do?
So I tend to, the category that I sort of put over to the side a moment ago is the one that's probably among the more inspiring to me, which is the people who come to us in their 40s or 50s, having really developed their careers, who want to bring these practices into their workplaces pretty quickly, right? Who are on management teams. And we usually have, 3 or 4 every year. I would say that, among the people earlier in their career journey, I tend to be most inspired by the people who start new businesses, exploring new models for the ways that things can work. And so there's a woman who graduated a couple years ago who has created a accelerator for solo entrepreneurs in the cannabis space. So people who are making like cannabis skin creams, for example. So non-medical marijuana uses, I guess, but like real consumer uses, right? Things that you'd be comfortable, things that I would use, right? And let's just leave it at that. So like anti-aging creams, for example. So she created an accelerator trying to make sure that those solo entrepreneurs had first-class design, first-class legal advice, great marketing, all the Instagram sort of mechanics to launch their brands, and that they would retain ownership of their companies, right? and that company is called Mother Superior, which I think is great. And so that's a good example of somebody who really used the program to develop their idea, create something that was mission aligned for them, using the skills of design, offering those skills to a community, and building something from the ground up. That person came to us from the Air Force. They have a really deep operational background and really wanted to do something that was much more creative with their life. And, that's a success in my mind. We have a couple other students. We've had FBI agents do our program and take what we offer back to the Department of Defense. We had an executive from the Gates Foundation do our program a couple years ago and take some of the skills that we teach back to the way that the Gates Foundation makes decision about grant making. Those are some of the sort of fancier ones. But lots of our students go on to consult startups, to work for places like Ernst & Young and McKinsey, to work for banks like Cap One and Wells Fargo that are headquartered here. They work at Google, they work at Facebook. I mean, I think these skills are widely portable. And one of the things that is possible when you teach them, especially collaboration and critique, is that you're you're creating a tribe of people who go out and evangelize this work and then have one another to reflect with about it. And so when we talk about design strategy as an emerging field, I mean, I still think that there is a ton of a very, very wide lens of what design strategy means. And they're out defining that field, right? I say that it's like marketing was 100 years ago. And, it's exciting to be part of something that it feels like it's at the forefront of the change yet to come, as opposed to clinging on to the practices that we've had basically since the Industrial Revolution.
How does it shift in terms of like how they feel, or does it, do you notice any changes in, and then personally? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I mean, so it's funny. I have a colleague at Stanford who is a coach on the side, right? That's her professional practice. And she tells me that just using critique, I'm like saving them therapy bills later for when they're executives and they have imposter syndrome and they don't know how to, justify or relate to other people. And I think that's really funny in a way. So I think that our program is really small. It's really intimate. Students get one-on-one attention from me, every student in our program. And, I think that for many, it's a journey of transformation, and they end up feeling like they know who they are and what they want to do in the world. And people make changes, but to me, I think I see the growth. I teach them in the first semester, and then I come back and I critique their final projects. So I see them the whole journey. And I see people who become comfortable with themselves, who become the types of people who like I would want as colleagues. And so, I mean, it's a little bit different than to this point of, it's different than comparing yourself after a math test, right? I'll never forget, like in fifth or sixth grade, I remember doing like long multiplication and getting a math problem from our teacher, whose name I'm going to think of in a second. Maybe it was Mr. Hamilton or something like that. But I could see his face. And I remember that the prize for winning this, 8-digit times 6-digit math problem was like a candy bar, which would never happen now, but it was the 80s. And I remember being like, I got it. There were clear winners and losers. And, you motivate me with a candy bar as an 11-year-old, I am in. I think that removing that from our program and just encouraging people to flourish with their own skills, talents, perspectives, puts them in different relationship with one another, which is to say that they're not necessarily competitive with one another. They're additive to one another. And
really beautiful. I mean, what you just saying, like, they're not competitive with one another.
They're not. I mean, it's different.
Right, you think of business and then that kind of thing, think it's, competition, but that every person has a place in the world, and to be so clear about what they're...
Well, if anything, they might struggle outside the program with getting other people on board with that way of thinking, right? But I do think that over time, they really I like to think that the profile of one of our students is the type of person who can bring others along with them. And so I do think they have learning journeys on how to do that effectively in different types of organizations. But that's all of our work anyway, right? They're just equipped with a certain set of skills that I think facilitates that happening with more trust, faster, more easily, and maybe pleasantly.
Well, yeah,
the alternatives.
You get to enjoy what you do more. So, gosh, that does a lot. That's transformative in many different aspects of their lives. And what do you think we could do to create a society that supports artists?
It's such a good question. I mean, there's lots of levels to that question, right? I don't. Creating a society feels a little frustrating at the moment because I feel like we are living in times of so much uncertainty that it's even just hard to indulge in thinking about it, right? But there are projects that I've seen that I think are showing encouraging prospects, I guess. I don't know that they're the answers, but I like the explorations a lot. One of those is this project called Culture Bank, and Culture Bank is a collaboration between YBCA, where I'm the board chair, and the Federal Reserve System. And Culture Bank is looking at whether the community development finance ecosystem could be deployed. So the community development finance ecosystem, this is the world I came from when I was in government, supports affordable housing. It supports creative placemaking increasingly, which is parks, bike lanes, public art, and sometimes supports community projects like rec centers, once in a while community colleges and things like that. And so there is this discussion about whether the community development finance architecture could be deployed to support artists, to offer artists a role in how their communities adapt and grow. And so that's one way. And the way that ecosystem is working is really at the local level. It has, there's not a title for them, of course not, because that would be too much. So there are pilots for that project working in Dallas, in Oakland, and in Kansas City. Each of those places has a slightly different model, but each location has access to the headquarters location, which is at YBCA, and local people on the ground exploring new models. And so in Dallas, the SMU Meadows School, which is their art school, working with local foundations, has taken funding from Culture Bank and is deploying it to artist entrepreneurs and is tracking those artist entrepreneurs in a variety of ways, but including the same ways that community development finance tracks whether its projects are successful. And so the goal of that pilot is to say, what if we just decided to have a different audience for the current funding streams that we have, right? And does it work to invest in artists that way? And so that pilot is, I think, about 1.5 years in progress. In Kansas City, they're exploring a slightly different model, which is choosing, they're working there with one of the big local foundations, the name of which escapes me, and they're looking at larger projects that would transform parts of the city, right? Thinking about transformative projects as opposed to individual artist entrepreneurs. And in Oakland, they're working with a music accelerator on what is the convening power of that space, and do the people who come through that space have a higher ability, given the training that they receive, as well as the funding they receive, to go out and create commercial enterprises. And so to me, this question, and it's been written up in all the Fed journals and all of that, and I think the question at the moment is it philanthropy funded or is it commercially funded? How do you turn the dial on something like that to make it more widely accessible? I would just offer that I think it's widely understood that community development finance hasn't changed in 30 years and is ripe for an adaptation. So that's the kind of thing. I don't know that transforms society, but that certainly creates a way to pay artists to contribute to their communities and be acknowledged financially by some systems that have not acknowledged them before. So I think that feels validating to people who put in that work. that they basically do for love, right? Like, you do that work not to get paid for it, but because you must.
Well, the value is deeper, and it's actually like choosing to value art exactly for what we were talking about, the reflective work on the
Exactly.
wall. And so knowing that art is an integral and normal healing part of our culture, society, can be like the pulse of how we're doing. And if we've gone through difficult situations, to have just reflected back on us, like, and honor what people have gone through, and be really healing for stress, for traumatic situations, for as a collective.
I mean, I think it oozes out of communities that need healing. I mean, it is fundamental to finding joy in pain. It is. And whether people do that individually or together, I don't know that, I mean, it certainly matters, but I don't know that one is better or more necessary than the other. I think it's all necessary.
At every level, from the school level to further on, and then, we have like post-grad, and then out into the business world, and then the greater community, which is what you were describing with the culture bank. So there is an opportunity for people at any level to embrace it and to really acknowledge its value. And it's a choice.
To enjoy it, right? I mean, so I started at YBCA. I didn't start as a board member, right? I started as a fellow. They invited me in to explore this topic. How do we design freedom? And they invited all different kinds of people, right? I was teaching economics at an art school. And, my colleagues were poets and dancers and dissidents and like nuclear scientists and people who work at Google. And we all came together to think about this question: how do we design freedom? That's a long story that we probably don't have time to get into. And what I realized in this institution, and the sort of beginning of that journey for me, began by just wanting to continue to go back to that room, because that room with those people on those topics, and the sort of outer world of that, right? The world of the institution itself, and the other people coming into that place on different topics and the different ways that presented. All I knew was that room was the most exciting room I was ever in the city that I live in. And I just wanted to keep going back. And so I kept going back, and I kept going back. And it pushed me, right? And it pushed me to decide that is a critical component of how I want to invest my time and my energy. And like, it's really that simple. I mean, I never thought that I consider myself a fairly creative person, but I never thought that, and it was through this fellowship on how do we design freedom, that I would find myself presenting a piece of art at it doesn't call itself a museum, but is probably considered a museum by people who, don't differentiate between people who own art and people who present art, like, right, big buildings with art, and sort of all a museum. I never thought I would do that. That was a crazy experience for me to have. But to make everyday people into artists, and to take everything that you have inside of you and try to make it available for other people to understand when it's at the level of how we design freedom. Like, I can't help but decide to want to spend my time with an organization like that empowers all of us to explore those questions with one another, with people very different from us. And, that really, really had a huge impact on me. I mean, now I'm the board chair.
Well, you're seeing that it has a powerful voice, and an empowering voice that can have a huge impact on the community. I mean, being able to like intentionally create art and help support freedom, or discuss that and all the elements, it can be a huge impact. Just to share with all the families, because it's like, wow, what we were talking about, art helps give you a voice from the elementary school, and then here you're talking about something so big like freedom. What do you suggest that people do to, just on a personal level, help incorporate more art into their lives?
That's a good question. I guess I think about this in a couple of different ways. And I'm one person, right? So I really believe that like making a mixtape could definitely be art for you. And, or make you a designer, right? And I don't know that we have to distinguish between the two for purposes of your personal practice. But I do a couple of different things. In normal times, in like non-COVID times, I like to go see art when I feel stuck or like I need to be inspired. And I think I do that because I never know how it's going to hit me. And I like the ability, I like to know, it's almost like I know exercise is going to make me feel good, right? I don't always want to do it, but I'm always happy I did it. And, shout out to Peloton. That's all I can say. Peloton during COVID has changed my life and probably kept me sane. So in my normal life, similar to the way that I treat exercise, I use going to see art as a way of dislodging that feeling of being stuck. And I think I do it because I know that I can never expect whatever is going to happen. I like going to do something knowing that I don't know what it's going to do for me yet, but that it's going to do something. And it always does. It always makes me think about things differently. It always offers me another perspective. It always helps me to take a step back and reapproach whatever has me stuck in a different way. So that's one way, right? That's more as an observer of art.
And it helps you get comfortable with the unknown, like you don't know how you're going to react. So
yeah, I mean, I also love to go to basketball games, right? It's just one of the things that I like to do that helps me feel whole, right? And so that's more observer. As a practitioner, as somebody who likes to do things, I mean, I have always loved school supplies. I have school supplies all around my desk around me. I often draw people when I'm on Zoom meetings to help me pay attention to what they're saying. With my kids, there's this wonderful artist who lives a few blocks away from me, actually, and who also teaches at CCA. You might have seen her work in the New York Times. Her name is Wendy MacNaughton. And she started hosting on Instagram drawing hour during COVID every day at 10 a.m. And she would often start that session with this exercise that is pretty famous. You draw a spiral for 1 minute. And it's almost a meditative practice, right? It's meant to calm your mind and prepare your hand and eye to work together, right? It's just a way to tone it down. And so my daughter and I would sit with the iPad propped up with Wendy MacNaughton, and we would draw a spiral. And that to me is like a really, really good little thing. It's almost the same as the breathe function if you have an iWatch, right? Like just taking a minute and doing something really simple to calm your nervous system. So after she did that, Wendy would do, I think there's 30-minute sessions, and they're all on YouTube now. She would draw something different every day. And so we would draw plants, and we would draw rainbows, and we would draw trees, and we would draw what we saw at our window. And I literally would do it side by side with my daughter. We got these sketchbooks where, for 20 minutes a day, we would draw together. And I have to say that especially with, 4 people working in a home in their different corners, that small practice was immensely calming and immensely satisfying. And I think just it's really powerful to feel like you can draw, right? I think we all write a lot, right? And it's great to take notes. I still take notes. I know a lot of people take digital notes now, but I still like to write. And I love being able to draw the pictures of what it is I'm seeing. Like it's almost like taking a picture. It helps my recall. It helps me feel like I can express myself more fully. And so most of my art doesn't go anywhere, but that's one small way. I'm a big fan of drawing. I've also been thinking about getting a potter's wheel and like putting it on my front porch and sort of molding clay and watching the world go by. But I think that's probably the COVID talking. I think I'm just looking for ways to be a little bit more in observation of the world around me than I feel like I have access to right now. I'm really sick of screens. So the last thing I want to do at the end of the day is look at the screens more. Like I'm not really interested in TV these days. But I also bake, right? I baked a crisp every weekend of quarantine or shelter in place. My husband is cooking up a storm. Like I definitely view cooking as an art form and as a creative practice. So I think the key in terms of advice would just be find something that you enjoy. Find something that feels like it. Probably the best proxy for, us regular humans on this side of things is exercise. Like, that after you do it, you'll feel better, and find something that makes you feel better, and, add it to your toolkit of the things that sustain you. So
if you take steps like that every day, you're building your life so that you feel good.
I actually felt like this period, I don't think I mentioned this to you before. I feel like this period has been, for me, in terms of the structure of a day, the most challenging and transformative that I've felt since I had children, right? I've thought a lot about those days where all of a sudden, all of the assumptions that you used to have about your days before you had kids are different. And it requires that you really dig deep and figure out, how do I want to show up? Who am I showing up for? In what ways? What gets deprioritized in this new world? And I've really reflected back on that time a lot during COVID, right? And, I'm still developing the ways that are going to work for me in this format of life. And it's interesting, but I've definitely leaned probably further into a creative practice than I did before.
Well, thank you, Sarah, so much for being here. I really loved having this conversation.
My pleasure.
It's been so inspiring on many different levels, and I love being able to see it from all those different perspectives, because then everyone gets to see that no matter where you are in your life, no matter what you're doing, that art can help you. And I hope that we can integrate it into our health in a very normal way. To have a whole normal.
The world would be a better place. And we'd all understand one another better.
Yeah, this is the point. That would be so great. Well, thank you for being here. And
so nice to see you. Thank you for having me.
Thank all of you for being here with us too. And I'll see you in the next video.